Hi everyone. In light of autumn and this beautiful fall season, it's only fitting that we talk about Wednesday. Tim Burton's incredibly popular Netflix show from last year. Wednesday is based on the popular character from movies, TV shows, and comics originally created by Charles Addams. The Addams Family, our favorite kooky, ooky, spooky family, has also been franchised and rebooted literally to death. So how does one keep it fresh? Surprisingly well in this new iteration, thanks in no small part to Jenna Ortega's fantastic acting. Wednesday was a great show when it came out, but in rewatching it this year, it is hard not to see how toxic Wednesday Addams actually is. She's called out for her terrible behavior by the other characters in the show, but in a broader sense, the whole show and the world it creates is an exploration of really toxic behaviors. It is visually stunning, spooky, and so appropriate for this season. But upon examination, it is difficult not to see the truth of it. The ideas of the Addams family in the show are also revived by adding a Generation Z spin upon it. It is primarily a series for teenagers, as the main character is a teenager, and the setting is a high school. Gen Z, as they are called in America, is a somewhat different generation than those who came before it. Millennials were truly the first digital generation, but Gen Z knows very little of their life without the internet, if they know any at all. This show doesn't just have all Gen Z characters, it also encompasses their world and challenges. But what makes Wednesday unique is that it encompasses the toxicity of Gen Z and their world, a world that makes them the way that they are. It paints the portrait of a world that is rife with crappy people, injustice, and corruption. One where young people, without fully developed brains or adult guidance, are forced to make decisions beyond their understanding that often have intense consequences. Because in this world, they are not simply free to be teenagers and be stupid, as we all know teenagers can be. They have to be mature, which they are not always capable of being. They are not free like the teenagers of past generations, because they are too aware of everything courtesy of their phones. Educated and often more aware than their elders, they are intelligent but immature, and shouldering the burden of thousands of years of karmic crap around oppression, whether that be racism, colonialism, sexism, and more. Much like Wednesday, most Zoomers must take action on what they know is wrong, and just like her, they often do it the wrong way. Of course, I doubt that most would ever go full nut job and blow up a statue. So let's take a critical look at Wednesday and the toxicity of Gen Z. But before we do, let's just be clear. This is not a referendum on Gen Z. They are unfairly persecuted given their age, pressures, and brain power. No one is saying that they are toxic completely, just that they have some toxic traits that they have picked up for a variety of reasons. In fact, I would love to see some of these pundits ranting about the problems of Gen Z and the youth defend every decision they made as teenagers or 20-somethings. No, this video is more about understanding them using Wednesday and her world as a microcosm. Now, we all know the story of the Addams family, but here's a quick refresher. In this version, Gomez and Morticia meet and fall passionately in love at Nevermore Academy, a boarding school in Vermont. They have two kids, Wednesday and Pugsley, a butler, Lurch, and a mysterious hand known only as Thing. At the beginning of the series, Wednesday is shipped off to Nevermore after having been expelled from many other schools. Her most recent infraction involved putting piranhas in a swimming pool, specifically aimed at the boys bullying her brother. So she is being shipped off to a school where she is certain she will be in the shadow of her parents, who were basically celebrities. Wednesday is obviously unexcited about this prospect, trying desperately to escape town. That is, until her classmate tries to murder her. Now, I didn't mention before, but Nevermore isn't your average school. It is for people who are outcasts. Outcasts, in this case, seems to mean people with abilities such as telekinesis or psychic, or those who were born vampires, werewolves, sirens, without a face, gorgons, and so on. Wednesday, in this series, has recently started having psychic visions, violent ones, as we later learn because of her natural disposition towards darkness. Wednesday's classmate Rowan is convinced that she will bring about the end of Nevermore, according to a picture that his psychic mother drew years before she died, but before he can kill her, he is killed by a monster. Suffice to say, Wednesday is intrigued and decides to stay at Nevermore, alienating and irritating everyone as she goes about investigating Rowan's death as well as the identity of the monster. And in true Zoomer fashion, she uncovers a much larger conspiracy. Wednesday is the quintessential Gen Z gal, but also not really, because she doesn't believe in cell phones. In many ways, she fits the bill of both what everyone in the world wants to be, someone who is totally sure of herself and doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks, but specifically Gen Z because of the nihilistic attitude attached to that self-certainty. She is very much her own person, but she's also one of her own generation, and we're going to get into how that is in a minute. But before people who have no Gen Z friends or relatives start taking this video as gospel, let's be clear. She is very much a dramatic exaggeration. Generation Z, for the purposes of this discussion, were born anywhere between 1997 to 2012, or 1995 to 2009. There's always some overlap between generations, but these are the two ranges that make make the most sense. Wednesday, if she is 16 in 2022, would have been born in 2006. They grew up in a time when social justice was really important, but corruption was also abound. In the last decade, so many people have been cancelled or disgraced. Their lives so far have been marked by corrupt leaders being outed or jailed for their terrible behaviors. As a result of the intense flow of information, there isn't a sense that anyone is truly clean. There is a harsh edge and judgment among many young people, as well as a skepticism of anything that is establishment. Now that's something that is natural of all teenagers, but these teenagers specifically have the receipts to always back it up readily available in their pockets. Leaders and people in positions of power are suspect because so many have been proven to be corrupt in so many ways. More than just the odd gaffe or mistake in the press. People in power can't hide anymore. Young people do not have the tolerance for the systems, practices, and policies that are the status quo because they are aware of the history of our world. And really, when you look at the age of the average American, which rises ever so slightly every passing year, as well as the average age of our leaders, it is difficult not to see that they are working against the desires and needs of young people. Our government these days is making choices for short-term gains because they and our populace is aging. So you really can't blame young people for not liking or trusting those in positions of power. And more than just being aware of the history of the world and the corruption of the systems we live in, they are also bombarded with it. The platforms that they use to keep up with their friends and engage with their hobbies are the same platforms that are filled with all kinds of information and propaganda and discussion about complex topics, often reduced to 1-minute dance videos. These two factors will likely make Zoomers much more intense about social justice, unforgiving of those who do not comply, willing to cancel and berate anyone who doesn't fit their ideas, distrustful of authorities, leaders, and systems that have made their worlds difficult. And unfortunately, as a result, they are not the happiest generation. Many taking prescription drugs and diagnosing themselves with mental illnesses. We see these seemingly toxic traits manifest in Wednesday. She is quick to accuse everyone of foul play, from the guy who saves her life from a falling gargoyle to the principal. She has absolutely no compassion or understanding, is impatient and quick to judge. Her psychic visions of things seem so clear, despite warnings from her mother, who is also psychic, and others at the academy that her visions are dangerous and may not show her the whole picture. Yet, she never doubts herself, to the point of madness. She gets people falsely arrested, gets her therapist killed, and gets Thing and her roommate Enid nearly killed as well. It is amazing to never hear the words "I was wrong" come out of her mouth. Young people can generally be brazen, it's their brains, but to have so much hubris as to tie up and torture a suspect, that's dangerous. As the Piranha incident showed us, she has an overdeveloped sense of justice and a desire to do violence. Wednesday's visions ought to humble her a bit somehow, but they just drive her anger forward. Her visions seem a bit like the internet these days. We think someone is giving us the answers through the media or our own research. We think we know who to condemn in a given situation no matter how far away. How can we deny the facts of a war or some other injustice? But later on, the situation comes out as having been something different. Wednesday only ever sees a portion of what is happening. She assumed her therapist was guilty because she left roses in Eugene's hospital room that were the same colors as the ones she found in Laurel Gates' childhood bedroom. The monster killing everyone was a Hyde, and in this world, Hydes are monsters unlocked within a person through hypnosis, chemical inducement, or the revelation of a trauma. Who better to do so than a therapist? And who else to be the monster than the guy who saved her life on the very first day of school, has a crush on her, and consistently sticks up for her every chance he gets? He has psychic visions of the monster, and he paints them, so he must be the monster. He comes from a wealthy home, so he must be corrupt. Wednesday falls for planted evidence and half-correct visions because she is impatient and impulsive. But there are consequences to her actions. She's not part of the Scooby Gang, where every mystery ends with a trip to the malt shop, and in that way, the stakes of Gen Z's world are much higher than that of earlier teenagers. Wednesday Addams is problematic, but that's not all she is. She defends not just herself from bullies, but her friends too, and protects them from consequences when her brazen actions land her in hot water with the authorities. And this is where we see her true nature, and the brilliance of Jenna Ortega's acting. To give this one-dimensional, often toxic monster some depth and kindness. We only see it in glimpses. Wednesday is actually deeply sensitive, terrified of getting close to anyone, so she paints this facade of a young woman who doesn't care what anyone thinks of her. In fact, she's painted it on herself so well that it's like a permanent mask, one that we can just barely see behind, though her therapist can see it. She's so sensitive and afraid of getting hurt. She feels so self-conscious about being different that she is aggressive about protecting anyone else who is made to feel that way. We see this in the story of her pet scorpion, Nero.
I took my pet scorpion Nero out for his afternoon stroll and we were ambushed. They wondered what kind of freak would have a scorpion for a pet. Yeah.
She never lets anyone get close to her, but she truly cares about human life, especially those who are outcasts, so she puts her energy into protecting them. Wednesday is a sword, and she's not afraid to cut someone, but she tries to make it only as necessary. And while people may admire her for her ability to not care what anyone thinks, truly she does care deeply. The only two people who give her incessant compliments, which is not true friendship or even a relationship, are the two people she never suspects and end up being the villains. Her own need for validation and acceptance is what acts as the biggest blinder. Ordinary people don't just give out that kind of fawning willy-nilly, certainly not to someone who is toxic AF to them. The fake compliments, the showering of attention, that feels better and easier to tolerate than someone trying to actually connect on a deeper level. The problem with her and with Gen Z is that they are smart, capable, but they are young and their brains are working against them. Understanding that that kind of behavior is not normal comes with experience. Things like impulse control, critical thinking, these are things we develop with age. In the future, she and many of her compadres will likely end up eating a lot of crow. Maybe this is just a trope in Gen Z because I'm not just talking about her. Remember this little show that was on Netflix a couple years ago? Yeah, this girl literally split the timeline of the world in two because she wanted to be both the queen of hell and a teenage witch. Wednesday's world is filled with toxicity, gaslighting, lying, manipulations, cover-ups, murder, bigotry, and so on. So it's hard not to see how and why she behaves the way she does. Her very first week, the principal covers up Rowan's murder just to keep the peace in town. Later, it's revealed that the mayor actually ignored her mother Morticia's complaint that she was being stalked because the young man's family helped to fund his campaign for mayor when he was still sheriff. Wednesday's world of toxicity is not just one where people act badly, but they are kind of bad to the core. Corrupt mayor, the repressed and broken sheriff, her tormented love interest, even the peripheral characters like her roommate's mother, Bianca's estranged cult leader mom, they're all problematic characters. They don't have to be. Through some basic developed morals, they could all be decent people. The only truly good people are the ones who seem to be target for retribution at the problematic aspects, such as the local therapist Dr. Kinbot who was murdered, the lovebirds Gomez and Morticia who nearly go to jail for murder because of a stalker who had corrupted the mayor, Eugene, the young bee enthusiast who is attacked by the monster when he goes to investigate his lair and put into a coma. There are other good people in her world, but truly the most pure and decent ones go through the most physically or emotionally. Nothing is as it seems in this world. Wednesday should reevaluate her thoughts and her decisions, be more concise in her accusations. Her accusations have consequences, but that doesn't stop her from hurting people recklessly, accusing her therapist and her friend Xavier of being the mastermind and monster duo. People question everything to death with conspiracies running rampant, and people become obsessed with finding the truth. Yet there are never any clear answers, and people often get hurt in the process. Wednesday won't admit to it, but living in all of this, she desperately wants to be a weapon for good. But make no mistake, she is a weapon, as we hear both Goody and Morticia tell her of her disposition as a raven. Now again, we're making it very clear here that she is a dramatic interpretation of Gen Z, and more specifically of their political leanings. The overdeveloped feelings of justice, the ridiculous need to get it on their own, to rebel against authority, we have seen this time and again among young people, even millennials to a degree, given how fine the line is between the generations. It is so important to her, and many young people, to be good in a world that is bad, because they know what it's like to suffer without protection. But the problem with being a weapon is your whole world is about war. Wednesday is a product of her world. Wednesday is obviously an extreme example of Zoomers. If they all ran around torturing people and blowing up statues, that would be scary. But Wednesday's world is one at war. One that is in a constant state of tension between the outcasts at Nevermore and the normies who live in the local town of Jericho. And it's hard to say whether she invented this war in her mind because of her obsession with justice, or if it has always been that way. Because Wednesday's arrival in the show is what kicks the story into high gear. Rowan is convinced that she will destroy the school because of his mother's visions. And in the same way, has our world always been a war of classes, sexual orientations, races, or was it something that flared up with the arrival of Gen Z and the proliferation of the internet? Obviously, there has always been some level of those conflicts between disparate groups, flared up in some parts of the world more than others. There have always been conflicts between various tribes, but is that the defining feature of our world as it is in Jericho? And this is Wednesday's vision of the world, that normie bigots are evil and must be destroyed before they destroy outcasts. She never spells it out outright, but her most scathing comments are always towards Principal Weems and Mayor Walker, the two somewhat corrupt leaders working in tandem to try and keep the peace between the town and the school.
No man chooses evil because it is evil. He only mistakes it for happiness, the good he seeks. Mary Shelley wrote that line to describe people like Weems, who do bad things under
Ultimately,
guise
the
of
real
protecting
villain
greater
is
good.
unveiled as the background conflict of normies versus outcasts comes to a head. The original founder of the town of Jericho, Joseph Crackstone, a pilgrim who had burned alive the original outcast settlers of the region. Wednesday learns of this horrific generational karma through one of her psychic visions, in which she meets her ancestor, a witch named Goody. Crackstone's descendant, who was thought to have died years ago, returns to town and brings him back to life. Played by the ever-insane Christina Ricci, Marilyn Thornhill, a teacher at Nevermore, or as she is actually known, Laurel Gates, is mad with her ancestors and her family's hatred of outcasts. Turns out, she had been using a young man, Tyler, oddly enough Wednesday's romantic interest, who we thought was a normie, but is actually an outcast known as a Hyde, to murder people around town, with plans to bring Joseph Crackstone back from the grave to kill all outcasts. She had Tyler harvesting organs from the victims, but could not fulfill her plans until Wednesday came, because Wednesday's witch ancestor Goody, in an attempt to avenge the outcasts that had been burned alive, had cursed Crackstone's grave, and it could not be opened without the blood of Goody's direct descendant. So the horror of Joseph Crackstone is unleashed upon Nevermore. The principal and the mayor are murdered by Laurel, and there is no one to save them. Thankfully, the kids are able to save their school with the right weapons and a little courage. Wednesday's vision of the world came to fruition, though not by her own hand. She's not wrong in her beliefs, because people like Laurel have absolutely no qualms about destroying peacekeepers like Weems and Walker, and Wednesday's not given any alternative. It seems there have been multiple instances of normie outcast scuffles since she arrived. Of course, the most recent one, when normie students throw red paint all over Nevermore's annual dance, was brought on by Wednesday blowing up the statue of Joseph Crackstone during the Harvest Festival celebrating him. Wednesday felt justified knowing what she did about Crackstone's murderous actions towards her ancestors, but that doesn't make it right. It just fans the flames of the fire. The problem with this worldview, that the sins of the past are happening right now, that they have never ended, is that it keeps them an open wound. There is no forgiveness or healing. There is no moving on. While Mayor Walker and Principal Weems were propping up the system of the school and the town as a part of protecting their own reputations, they were also keeping things running smoothly, even if it was on lies. Because not everyone knew the legacy of Joseph Crackstone, and not everyone cared. And blowing up the statue, bringing back the spirit of Crackstone, these are two sides of the same coin, keeping a generations-old conflict alive like a festering wound. And again, people like Laurel and Wednesday would both argue and say that it has never died, that there were small skirmishes flaring up from time to time. But then again, what can people like Wednesday do? What roadmap exists for true discussion and healing? The reason that such wars still exist is because there is nothing else to act as the salve over these old generational wounds. Did Weems and Walker ever think to have an actual Unity Day event? Not one where they celebrated the founder, to whom the town had few connections left other than Pilgrim World, but one that helped teach normies not to fear outcasts? The problem with those who keep the status quo is that it just doesn't cut it in modern times, and without something new, the old wounds will replay themselves just as they do here. The whole world of Nevermore is tinged with a sense of social justice. The outcasts themselves are metaphors for the outcasts of the real world. Whether it's Enid's storyline, where she can't turn into a werewolf, so her mom wants to send her to lycanthropy conversion camp, or how Bianca, the siren, ran away from her poor mother and siren-songed her way into a better class of people, or how Xavier, the mentally ill artist, was beaten up by normies and had his mural trashed in town. And we all know what Joseph Crackstone's actions represent. The death of the leaders only supports Wednesday's assertions that hiding the past only dooms us all, but it only seems to be the case because there's nothing else to fill the future, so the past steps in. Younger generations have been berated in recent years for being how they are, but truly they are a product of their world, and their pain is something often older folks are disconnected from. The worst part is that young people have few guides these days. Take Weems, for example. She could have taken Wednesday under her wing, used her sense of justice to help defend the protective barrier the school had built for outcasts. Weems truly believed in that. Instead, she spends all of her time controlling Wednesday and pushing her around. So naturally, Wednesday rebels against her. She could have taught Wednesday the history of the institution and nurtured her, even if she pushed against her. But instead, she just became frustrated and dismissed Wednesday's realistic concerns. And teenagers have been foolish like this for generations, and adults have dismissed them for years. Truly, the normie outcast cycle is not the only one repeating itself here. Unfortunately, there are more consequences to being young and stupid these days than ever before. Wednesday is a dramatic example of that fact. Let's talk about the recent war in the media, which, if it had been covered in the 1990s, would have been covered by TV news and newspapers. Once upon a time, kids had no idea about the news or what was going on. But now, thanks to the push of social media, media, they know everything and are constantly bombarded by it. It is difficult not to take a side, and when once upon a time their protests or comments to a friend would have been buried to time, now they are broadcast everywhere, and it costs them jobs and their privacy. When kids were once vilified for their ignorance on world affairs, now they are punished for having knowledge because older folks don't agree with it, or are not as educated or even tapped into what is blasting across social media and the news every minute. The important point here being that every generation is a product of its time, and in the past, many were unaware about the news and political issues because it was not always readily available to them. Ultimately, each generation is a portrait of its times, how it was raised. So, if you don't like kids, think about how you are interacting with them. Are you being dismissive of their concerns? Are you really listening and trying to understand? Because while it's easy to dismiss people whose brains aren't fully developed, or even be jealous of the fact that they are thin and have their lives ahead of them, listening to their scathing takes and unadulterated clarity is often hard. Teenagers are really quite smart these days, and they force us to challenge our own assumptions and systems, to question our comforts, and that is something the world really needs. They see the hypocrisy of the world and feel the pain of it. They haven't been worn down by time yet. We should listen to them and use our adult brains to offer them real solutions. Because when during COVID, college kids decided to go partying despite the danger, they did so because they likely felt it didn't matter if they became ill or passed it on to the older people in their lives who had no interest in caring for them. We give them a world to live for, or we give them reasons to be reckless. And when it came to COVID, there was no light at the end of the tunnel because there was so much infighting among politicians. It was an opportunity to reform healthcare and student loans, to raise the minimum wage. Instead, the pandemic became an opportunity for the rich to get richer and for the rest of us to get side hustles. I'll give some of the adults a break here. They really do try. Wednesday's parents seem to be the best, but it seems unfortunately that her personality is determined by the world around her rather than her home life. They really do a great job of nurturing her and loving her as she needs, but unfortunately, the way that people treat her has shaped her toxicity. She, like much of Gen Z, is shaped by the corruption around her. She is a good person, but truly she is blinded by her own pain, and even empathy, which becomes an intense sense of justice. The problem is that without an outlet for this very justifiable anger, she and the rest of Gen Z will burn down the world. If justice is the only thing that matters, then things like empathy, compassion, and understanding, the things that are necessary for peace, will never be a priority. And because we as a society have no salve to offer them for the generational wounds, for the never-ending wars between various groups, they will, in their own misguided attempts, continue those wars into the future. It paints a bleak vision of the future, but the problem is that people don't understand that. Older, powerful people like Weems or the sheriff see Wednesday as a problem to be solved, a person to be managed. But kids like this, these toxic beliefs that they are carrying, are harbingers of a very problematic future, and their concerns need to be taken seriously. While every person in Gen Z is not like this, it is not unrealistic to say that teenagers need guidance from older people. They need to be heard. Much more so than any other group in the world right now, they need wisdom, because they are the ones that are going to shape what our future looks like, for better or worse. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you found it interesting, please leave a comment, subscribe, like, all of those fun YouTube things, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!